So by now, if you're on this path, this pathless path, and you've been involved and consuming a lot of insights and information from people who speak about non-duality, by now you would have come across the idea of non-doership. There is no doer. And I wanted to make this video today because something that I see quite often, whether it's with people who are booking calls with me or whether it's just general commentary that I see online, is a misconception for when this is heard that there is no doer. And it's when the physical mind latches on to the idea that there is no doer, quite oftentimes that person then goes on to make the assumption that, well, there is no doer, therefore I will do absolutely nothing. And that is very clearly seen that that's coming through the lens of avoidance and resistance. And the very idea that there is no doer from that lens is the assumption that there's nothing to be done. And while that's true at the sense of the self with the capital S, that is not true that the play, the appearance, the apparent play of physical reality doesn't still continue and doesn't still play out. And that's why I wanted to make this video today, because I want to clarify at least my perspective of non-doership and the fact that the self is just abiding and the appearance plays out for no one by no one. And I wanted to talk about the undistorted perspective of what that looks like. Hi, my name's Todd. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I like to talk about all things consciousness, non-duality, and the hidden mechanics of reality so you can be more empowered on your own awakening journey. And if you resonate with that kind of content, hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with new releases. And the fundamental idea for this video is the idea of non-doership, and there is no doer for the appearance that plays out. And as I said previously, the misconception that I come up against quite often is a very obvious and very real resistance to kind of do the inner work, when invariably and inevitably those denser emotions, those denser energies begin to come to the surface that we'd previously been unaware of consciously. And they begin to come to the surface in seemingly this unwinding motion. So they've been so wound up and so embedded below the surface of our conscious awareness. And now is the time that it's coming up into the conscious awareness so we can see it, and it gets processed out of the system and it gets unwound, and the momentum of illusion unwinds, the momentum of distortion unwinds, and the energy of fear and separation seems to lose its grip and seem to unwind. But what this unwinding process can feel like at first is it can feel like it's actually strengthening. And the reason it feels like that is because it's coming to the surface of conscious awareness, where previously it's been hidden and kind of repressed or suppressed up until now. And then the misconception arises when someone hears about non-doership. It's almost like a bypassing and avoidance, because when these dense emotions come to the surface, it's almost like a clear ticket the physical mind latches onto to avoid the inner work, to avoid the shadow work, for example, and to avoid letting that unwind in a more harmonious and seamless way. And it's often described as feeling is healing. The concept of feeling is healing through when we can just be present with the dense emotions, be present with the shadow that's arising to the surface, is where it gets shown and shone in the light of our conscious awareness and gets cleared, and then allows it to unwind without any resistance, without too much friction. And then the perspective of non-doership then, through that lens of misconception, seems to create this idea of avoidance and resistance, and that's actually causing the holding onto and the stickiness of that shadow aspect, of that distorted energy, for longer than it needs to. And the fundamental key behind this video that I want to talk about now is the truth behind that misconception and how to clear it up from a simple perspective shift. Because while the physical mind wants to latch onto the idea of there is no one there who could do anything, the truth of the matter is not only is there no one there who could do anything, there's also no one there who could not do anything either. There's also no non-doer. And so really, if the play of the appearance needs to take the form of the physical avatar engaging in shadow work, certain yoga practices, certain techniques, certain mechanics for the play of the energy to unwind, for the play of the illusion to unwind, then that's exactly what needs to happen, and that's exactly what will unfold. And the very perspective of resisting that seems to cause more friction and seems to cause more stickiness of the distorted energy in shadow itself, because it's avoiding letting the processing of that take place. And because if you're listening to this, I'm assuming that you've probably had the experience of the oscillation between the illusion kind of fading for a while, and then it reestablishes itself, it reasserts itself, and then it might be a period of time of intense turbulence, and then it kind of fades again. And it's like this real cyclical oscillation of energy, this play of energy that kind of seems to pull our awareness in different directions until it's just completely seen through that there was never anyone there in the first place that this interplay was playing out for. And by letting the processing of the shadow work happen in the way it seems to want to play out, which will be guided through intuitively by intuitive guidance and insights, it seems to allow a more seamless processing of that information and that energy so it can unwind without as much friction and without resistance. And because as that energy unwinds, there's less of the illusion that's strong enough to really pull us back into the illusion. And that's exactly what I found, at least here anyway, is even though I had seen the truth, seen behind the no one being there, the non-doership, there was no one there that this was playing out for. Sometimes those frequencies and those fears became so strong as the shadow aspect rose to the surface that almost as like a survival mechanism, it drew my awareness back into the illusion. It drew my awareness back into the character because it was just so visceral and just seemingly so painful. And so if I went through the lens of non-doership and avoidance during those periods, which I'm sure I did, then what would happen is the resistance and the friction would arise. And so that interplay of energy couldn't process through the system in a more seamless way, in the way that it was kind of trying to. And sure, there's definitely those people who will have full awakening very quickly and have full awakening, and it's seen that there's nothing happening for anyone. It's just the self with a capital S. It's just presence. It's just awareness. And even if there's some turbulence left, it's not strong enough to pull them back into the illusion, so they can kind of just let it play out while retaining non-dual awareness and non-dual insight. However, I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to those people right now who seem to oscillate and get pulled back in by the strength and how visceral those distortions and those fears and those shadow aspects can feel as they rise to the surface. And it's a really important insight because, as I said, the misconception is that there being a non-doer means that there's nothing to be done at the level of the appearance itself. When the appearance that's playing out that we know as physical reality itself, it will play out exactly how it will. And the reason it's so important is because, especially because the people who I talk to sometimes, it's important because I can see that they're actively denying and actively avoiding and actively resisting a lot of their intuitive insights they're receiving about a certain path or modality or certain healing aspect that they feel compelled to go down. And they're actively avoiding it and actively bypassing it because of this concept of non-doership, and because this concept of non-doership has been latched onto by the physical mind and by the belief in being the separate character, and is kind of steering their perspective into that path of avoidance and resistance. And absolutely, there is no modality and no technique and no practice and no amount of shadow work that can bring you closer to what you already are, because you already are that. But having the conscious of awareness of that stabilized and consistent in day-to-day physical reality for the avatar itself as well, like a clear screen, is, I think, what is the unfoldment that's taking place. And it's totally okay to want to stabilize who you really are, stabilize your present awareness, stabilize that non-dual perspective into physical reality, into the perspective of the avatar. And so when you receive the insights of perhaps this is a modality to go down, perhaps this is a technique to look into, perhaps this is some shadow work that I need to be doing, it's okay to engage in that and it's often a good idea to engage in that, as resisting and avoidance often leads to more friction in the processing that takes place of that energy, that movement of energy that seems to be moving in an unwinding fashion as the illusion unwinds. So if you've been in that camp where you're kind of feeling like there is no doer, so there's nothing to be done, and there's nothing that needs to play out in the physical appearance. And so if you look back on that and know you're coming through the lens of avoidance and resistance, which feels heavy, sticky, dense, as opposed to following the intuition or your true self and intuitively feeling in to how the avatar's physical reality will play out next, then it's just that perspective I wanted to share, that not only is there no doer who could do anything, there is no doer who could not do anything. Essentially, there is no non-doer either. So there's just present awareness, there's just non-dual awareness, and whatever's playing out can play out in a harmonious way in a path of least resistance by just not resisting, by just not avoiding, and just by maintaining the lens of perspective of what needs to be done and what needs to unfold will happen in exactly that way. So I hope this was helpful for at least one person, because I did feel like this was a video I wanted to talk about, as I see this as a misconception a lot, and I see a lot of avoidance and resistance, and it's definitely easy to understand, because what seems to arise from the shadow aspect, from the unconscious, from that which sits below conscious awareness for our whole lifetimes, what seems to arise can be very painful, as it seems to be the inverse frequency, the inverse energy of our true nature, which includes fear, anger, and a whole host of other emotions and energies that can arise. So it is natural that the belief in being a separate self would want to avoid that pain and would want to avoid those seemingly uncomfortable insights that invariably arise. And if you've seen my other videos, you would know that I offer a free complimentary resistance mapping step-by-step guide. It's about a 27-page step-by-step guide that I've put in the first line of the description, or even in the pinned comment below, that you can download completely free of charge, which can step you through how the processing of resistance can unfold in a more seamless and harmonious way. And even though it's unfolding for no one, it can still unfold in a way without avoidance, without resistance, and without as much friction. See you in the next video.